the vastness of the Egyptian desert, monuments rise that have challenged time and human understanding for millennia. The pyramids. These giants were built with extraordinary precision and mastery. They represent both the greatness of an ancient civilization and one of humanity's greatest enigmas. Many things have been said and written about what the pyramids actually were. Obviously, there is an official version that explains in great detail the doubts related to these magnificent structures. But there are some anomalies that challenge this version and lead many independent researchers to believe that the official version doesn't work, or at the very least, that many of the explanations provided need to be completely revised. But what are these anomalies? Some of them are truly surprising. But to really understand what we're talking about, we need to start from the beginning of this story. The pharaonic history of Egypt begins around 3000 before Christ and ends in 30 before Christ. It spans roughly 3,000 years. Over all this time, 31 dynasties succeeded one another, but the construction of the pyramids concerns only a small part of this history. In particular, the most important structures were built between the 3rd and 6th dynasties. These structures' architecture didn't progress linearly, experiencing remarkable development in the 4th dynasty before declining in later dynasties. But to better understand what we mean, let's look at a chart that shows the building volumes attributed to each pharaoh. By looking at it, we can clearly see that during the 4th dynasty, much more was built compared to other periods. This 90-year dynasty saw the construction of the pyramids of Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure. But the volumes can be misleading, since it's not just about quantity, but also construction quality. In fact, if we look closely, we see the 4th dynasty not only built more than others, but also produced higher quality works. Looking at the pyramids built during the various dynasties, it's clear that neither the dynasties before nor those after the 4th had the same construction abilities. The qualitative superiority of the 4th dynasty is undeniable. The pyramids from that period still stand, while those from other times are now in ruins. But how can this anomaly be explained? This difference could be due to catastrophic events like wars, plagues, or earthquakes, but we lack historical evidence for them. And moreover, there doesn't seem to be a great technological difference between the dynasties. However, if we do the opposite, that is, if we exclude the 4th dynasty from our analysis, we notice a certain continuity in the building abilities of these ancient architects. At this point, it would be more correct to ask ourselves, what happened during the 4th dynasty and what caused the loss of such building mastery in the following dynasties? If the reason why this incredible building ability developed during the 4th dynasty still remains a mystery, another highly debated topic concerns the purpose of the pyramids. Why were they built? According to the official theory, the pyramids were funerary monuments commissioned by the pharaohs. But are we really sure that's what they were? The first question we can ask to answer this is, how many bodies have been found inside the pyramids? The answer is very simple: none. But not only were no bodies found, but neither were the treasures with which the pharaohs used to be buried. If we talk about pharaohs' tombs, we can't help but think of Tutankhamun and all the legends that have developed around this incredible discovery. Numerous objects were found in the pharaoh's tombs, such as his chariot, canopies, and the sarcophagus. Interestingly, it's not in a pyramid, but carved into the ground, in the region called the Valley of the Kings, hundreds of kilometers away from the main pyramids. Someone might argue that the Great Pyramid is from the 4th dynasty, but Tutankhamun is from the 18th. So as time went by, the funeral rite might have been changed, but this, as we will see, is not correct. In 1925 near Giza, archaeologists discovered the tomb of Eteferes B, mother of Khufu, the pharaoh credited with building the Great Pyramid. The objects found in this tomb are similar to those found in the Valley of the Kings, suggesting that funerary traditions may not have changed that much over time. Egyptologists say nothing has been found inside the pyramids because over the years they have been the target of numerous acts of looting, which stripped them of all the treasures they contain. To test the Egyptologists' hypothesis, let's look back and consider Herodotus' words. The Greek historian, considered the father of history, who lived in 484 before Christ Herodotus. In his texts, he gives key initial information. When he arrived in Egypt, the Great Pyramid was still covered with white limestone slabs, and the white stone made it shine in the desert, making it visible from very long distances. But Herodotus adds another key detail. According to what he learned, Khufu's tomb would not be the Great Pyramid, but would be located on an island in the waters of the Nile.
The king ordered a canal dug from the Nile to the pyramid. The canal is long, wide, and deep, and it was dug to bring water around the place where it stands. The pyramid, which in this way is surrounded by water, with the Nile surrounding it. While the pyramid itself was built of smooth, well-worked white stone, around it was built a terrace of smooth black stone, similar to the stone of many statues. Near the pyramid on the north side, there is an underground tomb carved into the ground. It is said that the body of Cheops lies in it, and that it is surrounded by water brought there by a canal from the Nile. Since a stone can be rotated like a door, you can enter and exit this tomb.
In 25 before Christ, we instead have the account of Strabo. The Greek historian is the first to give us a description of the interior of the Great Pyramid.
The pyramid itself, according to Eratosthenes, has a base of 7 stadia and a height of over 6. Its entrance is through a thin stone that can be lifted by a lever made from a stick. The entrance leads to an underground passage sloping for a length of 40 cubits, which leads to an underground chamber.
Strabon describes a descending channel to an underground chamber, but it's empty with no treasure or evidence of the pharaoh. Another interesting account is that of Caliph al-Mamun, who in 820 AD entered the Great Pyramid. Not finding the entrance used by Strabo, he decided to create an opening by digging an entrance tunnel that, by a stroke of luck, intersected the descending passage previously explored by Strabo. Al-Mamun also stated that he found the underground chamber empty, but he did not give up and continued his exploration. He dug another passage into the rock that led him to a new chamber, the one we know today as the Grand Gallery. The Grand Gallery is an upward passage. The Caliph walked through it until he reached the 2 chambers, later named the Queen's Chamber and the King's Chamber. But once again, both chambers were empty. Disappointed by this discovery, Al-Mamun decided to abandon the search for good. According to Egyptologists, the Caliph found the rooms empty because they had been looted beforehand. At this point, it's fair to ask if Al-Mamun had to break through rocks to access the upper chambers, just as tomb robbers did. According to the official version, the looters had stolen the treasure through a passage called the Well Shaft. This passage, in fact, connects the Grand Gallery with the descending shaft discovered by Strabo. It's important to point out, however, that this tunnel is only 90 centimeters wide, has bottlenecks that go down to 65, and extends vertically for 60 meters. It must not have been easy at all for the thieves to lower themselves and the precious objects through this small shaft. Objects that, as we saw earlier, could even reach considerable sizes. But if we accept the idea that the pyramids were actually tombs, and that the objects in the pharaoh's body are missing because of the actions of tomb robbers, there is another question that needs to be answered. Why does official Egyptology attribute the construction of 3 pyramids to Pharaoh Snefru? Egyptologists suggest that most likely Snefru was not satisfied with the first 2, or maybe they had structural problems, and that's why he decided to build a 3rd one. It's hard to argue with this explanation. We can only note that it's surprising that the pharaoh undertook 3 such projects, 2 of which were failures. He achieved this in only 50 years of reign. Another question that comes up is why? Inside the Great Pyramid, there are 3 burial chambers, considering that the pyramid was supposed to house only one body, that of the pharaoh. The hypothesis is that the design changed during construction, explaining the 3 chambers. The first 2 chambers, the underground chamber and the Queen's chamber, were abandoned due to changes in the project, and for this reason, they were not completed. In reality, this hypothesis took a hard hit in 1992 when the engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink, thanks to a small robot he invented, made an exceptional discovery. Evidence supporting the project change theory is the length of the air shafts from the Queen's chamber. Egyptologists say these remained incomplete and thus only reached a few meters in height. However, Gantenbrink's robot has completely disproved this belief. Once inserted into the shafts, it revealed they weren't incomplete, but extended over 60 meters, even beyond the king's chamber. To see why this discovery disproves the design change theory, we need to know that the construction of the pyramid went from the bottom to the top, and that the chambers and all the shafts were not carved into the stone, but were the result of fitting together rocks that had been prepared beforehand. If the project had changed, continuing to build the shafts would have been a big waste of time and resources. Another controversial and fascinating point concerns the methods and timing of the construction of the Great Pyramid. Several hypotheses have been proposed over time, including building a straight ramp that rises with the structure. Although this hypothesis seems simplest, it faces major problems in practice. The Pyramid of Khufu is 138 meters tall today. At the time of its construction, its height was about 146 meters. Now imagine how long this ramp had to be in order to have a slope that wasn't too steep and allowed men to pull the large blocks of limestone and granite. Additionally, the ramp had to be dismantled and rebuilt each time the structure grew taller. We can say that building the ramp would have been more laborious than building the pyramid itself. Other theories suggest the construction of spiral ramps, either external or internal. While these hypotheses may help address the challenge of building a straight ramp, one aspect remains unclear: the construction time. Several independent researchers have studied this aspect very thoroughly. Let's begin with a known fact. The Great Pyramid contains 2,415,000 stones. Egyptologists agree it took about 20 years to build. Now let's pretend that all this pile of stones is already at the base of the pyramid. Let's not take into account the time needed for quarrying and transportation. To lay 2,415,000 stones in 20 years, you need to place 1 stone every 4 minutes and 21 seconds. That's if we consider a 24-hour workday. But if we consider daylight hours and assume the site worked 12 hours a day, it would have been necessary to place a stone every 2 minutes or so. Let's assume the pyramid was built with ramps, whether straight, spiral, or external. It doesn't matter. We know that a man can walk at an average speed of 4 kilometers per hour, but we have to take into account the slope of the ramp and the weight of the large stones that the men had to carry. This clearly reduces average speed. But let's make an overestimate and assume that under these conditions, the average speed is 2.5 kilometers per hour. Now let's consider a 200-meter ramp with a 6-degree slope. As previously stated, a man would take about 5 minutes and 30 seconds to walk up the ramp and reach a height of about 22 meters. This simple calculation shows we exceed the previously estimated 2 minutes, and we're considering a straight ramp that reaches 20 meters, but we know that the pyramid is actually much taller. Beyond this, we're not considering that they most likely had to move through narrow passages and had to turn to go around the pyramid. And we're not considering the environmental conditions, the heat and the fatigue. Of course, one could argue the men weren't hauling just a single block at a time, and that's certainly true, but how many blocks could they actually move at the same time, considering the space limitations of the ramps and the risk of collapses? Let's look at an example. In the 1960s, during the construction of the Aswan Dam, 2 temples at Abu Simbel were moved to prevent them from being submerged. This massive project involves splitting the temples into stone blocks weighing 20-30 tons each. The work took 3 years and involved moving 1,035 blocks. Each stone took about 25 hours to make. Let's use this data as a reference and consider only the largest blocks of the Great Pyramid, the ones that weigh between 25 and 70 tons. These account for just 2% of the stones in the Great Pyramid. Now let's calculate this for 12 working hours. It would take 133 years to put them all in place. One could argue that the temples were dismantled with absolute precision, and that this required more precise work than what was done in the Great Pyramid. But if we think this, we must not forget that we are comparing technology from the 1960s with that from 4,000 years ago. And we're still only discussing 2% of the blocks needed to build the Great Pyramid. It can also be argued that the pyramids had a higher priority than the temples near the dam. Thus, a much larger workforce could be mobilized for building the Great Pyramid. This is also true, but are we sure that the hypothesis of this incredible number of men used for the construction of the pyramid is so obvious? And that this instead didn't risk paralyzing an entire country and draining the pharaoh's coffers? We're nearing the end of the video. We have examined some of the most important objections that independent researchers raise against the official version that aims to explain what the pyramids are and how they were built. If most of these questions have no answer, however, we do have one certainty. The more in-depth studies are conducted on these incredible structures, the more unclear elements emerge. In 2017, for example, the Scan Pyramids project, using wography and advanced scanning technique, identified a large cavity inside the Pyramid of Khufu. This large void extends for at least 30 meters above the king's chamber. There are many speculations about its origin. Some suggest that it could be the real burial chamber of Khufu, while others believe that it is simply the result of the construction techniques used by the ancient architects. The Great Pyramid, thousands of years after its construction, continues to be an enigma that fascinates millions of people all over the world. Let us know in the comments what you think, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. See you in the next story.